Imagine walking into a hospital ward in the summer of 1952. It is long, and it is filled with rows of enormous metal cylinders, each one about the size of a small car made of steel, lying horizontal on wheeled frames. There is a rhythmic mechanical sound filling the room, a steady hiss and sigh, dozens of them slightly out of time with one another. And then you realize what you're looking at. Out of one end of each metal cylinder sticks a human head, a child's head resting on a small shelf, facing a mirror angled above them. The rest of their body is sealed inside the machine. The hissing and sighing is the sound of the machine's breathing, because the children inside them cannot. This was the iron lung ward. And for a generation of children paralyzed by polio, these coffin-sized metal machines were the only thing standing between them and suffocation. Some spent weeks inside, some spent months, and a few would spend the rest of their entire lives sealed within them. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the story of the iron lung. Everything in this account comes from documented medical and historical records. This is not a story of villains or cover-ups. It's something in some ways more haunting, a story of a terrible disease, and of the strange, remarkable, claustrophobic machine that medicine built to outwit it. To understand the iron lung, you first have to understand the terror of polio. For the first half of the 20th century, poliomyelitis, polio, was one of the most feared diseases in the world, and especially in wealthy nations. Every summer, it came. Parents lived in dread of the polio season, when outbreaks would sweep through communities. Swimming pools were closed. Children were kept home. Because polio, terrifyingly, largely struck the young, it became known in its most feared form as infantile paralysis, precisely because so many of its victims were children. There was also something uniquely unsettling about how it spread and struck. Unlike diseases associated with squalor, polio often hit clean, well-off suburban households, striking seemingly at random. Parents could do everything right and still watch their child fall ill. That randomness, the sense that no amount of care or cleanliness could guarantee safety, was part of what made the disease so psychologically terrifying to a whole generation of families. Polio is caused by a virus, and here is one of its cruelest features. For most people who caught it, it caused only mild flu-like illness or no symptoms at all. But in a minority of cases, the virus attacked the nervous system, specifically the motor neurons in the spinal cord that control muscle movement. When it did, it caused paralysis. A child could go from running and playing to being unable to move their legs within a matter of days. Many were left permanently paralyzed, needing braces, crutches, or wheelchairs for life. But there was one form of polio that was the most frightening of all, and that is the form the iron lung was built to fight. It was called bulbar polio, or the respiratory form. In these cases, the virus paralyzed the muscles used for breathing, the diaphragm and the muscles between the ribs, the muscles that pull air into and push it out of the lungs. And this created an absolutely horrifying situation. The patient's lungs were often perfectly healthy. Their mind was fully conscious and aware, but they had lost the ability to make the physical movements required to breathe. They were, in effect, slowly suffocating, awake, aware, and unable to draw breath, while surrounded by all the air they needed. Before the iron lung, this form of polio was very nearly a death sentence. There was almost nothing to be done. Doctors and nurses could only watch as conscious patients struggled and failed to breathe. The mortality was staggering. And then came the machine. The iron lung was, in its principle, ingenious. Its formal name is a negative pressure ventilator, and to understand why it worked, you have to understand how we actually breathe. When you take a breath, your diaphragm contracts and pulls downward, expanding your chest cavity. This creates lower pressure inside your chest, and air rushes in from outside to fill the vacuum. Breathing is fundamentally driven by changes in pressure. The iron lung recreated that pressure change from the outside. The patient lay inside the sealed metal cylinder, with only their head protruding through an airtight rubber collar around their neck. Then a bellows or pump attached to the machine would rhythmically pump air out of the chamber, lowering the air pressure around the patient's body. That drop in pressure caused the patient's chest to expand and pull air in through their nose and mouth, which stuck out into the open room. Then the pressure would equalize, the chest would relax, and air would be pushed back out. Inhale, exhale. The machine did the mechanical work of breathing that the paralyzed muscles no longer could. It was, quite literally, an artificial way to make a person breathe without touching their lungs directly at all, and it saved an enormous number of lives. A long, dim hospital ward, rows of steel cylinders receding into shadow, angled mirrors above each one, the rhythmic mechanical breath filling the silence. But saving a life is not the same as giving it back. And life inside the iron lung was a profound test of the human spirit. Think about what it actually meant. You lay flat on your back, immobilized, your entire body from the neck down enclosed in a metal tube. You could not move, you could not scratch an itch, or turn over, or hold anything, or feed yourself. You could see only what the mirror angled above your face allowed you to see, usually the ceiling and reflections of the ward around you. Nurses and attendants had to do everything for you, reaching in through small portholes fitted with airtight sleeves along the sides of the machine to tend to your body, all without breaking the seal that kept you breathing. For children, this was especially hard. Imagine being 6 years old, unable to move, sealed in a machine, watching the world through a mirror, kept alive by a rhythm you had no control over. Many were terrified of the machine failing. In the era before reliable backup power, a power cut was a genuine emergency. If the iron lung stopped, someone had to operate it by hand, pumping a lever to keep the patient breathing until power returned. There were smaller cruelties too, ones that rarely make the history books. Because the machine breathed for you on its own fixed rhythm, patients had to learn to time their speech to the exhale. You could only speak as the machine pushed air past your vocal cords, so conversations came in short, rhythmic bursts, broken by the mechanical breath. Eating was a careful, sometimes frightening process, timed to the cycle to avoid choking. And the isolation could be profound. To be a child, surrounded by other children in identical machines, yet unable to reach out and touch any of them, unable even to turn your head to see them except in a mirror. It was a strange, enclosed loneliness, togetherness, and separation at the same time. And yet, what comes through most powerfully in the documented accounts of iron lung patients is not just the horror, but the astonishing resilience. Children in these wards learned, adapted, and even played. They memorized the ceiling. They talked to the child in the next machine. They learned to read with pages held in front of their mirror and turned by an attendant. Some polio survivors developed a technique called frog breathing, a way of gulping air using the throat muscles that let them spend increasing amounts of time outside the machine, gradually reclaiming a measure of independence. Many patients who went into an iron lung during the acute, most dangerous phase of their illness recovered enough breathing function over weeks or months to eventually leave the machine behind, moving on with lives that were changed, but their own. The iron lung, for them, was a bridge across the deadliest stretch of the disease, but not for everyone. For a small number of patients, the paralysis of their breathing muscles never recovered. And for them, the iron lung was not a temporary bridge, it was home, permanently. There are documented cases of individuals who lived inside an iron lung for decades, for the majority of their entire lives. People who entered the machine as children in the polio epidemics of the mid-20th century, and who were still living in them, dependent on them for every single breath, 60, 70 years later. Some of these individuals lived truly remarkable lives despite their confinement, going to school, earning degrees, writing, even building careers, all while lying inside a steel cylinder that breathed for them around the clock. Their stories are, in a way, the ultimate expression of the human will to live and to find meaning. But we should not romanticize away the reality of it. To spend 70 years unable to breathe on your own, dependent on an aging machine that grew harder to repair as the decades passed and its manufacturers vanished, facing the constant quiet fear that a critical part might fail and could no longer be replaced. That is a form of endurance almost beyond comprehension. These were people who lived their entire existence inside the answer medicine had built to a problem it could not yet cure. As the decades passed, these long-term residents faced a peculiar and cruel additional challenge. The machines themselves became obsolete. The companies that had once manufactured iron lungs stopped making them and stopped making the parts. Specialized technicians who understood the aging mechanisms grew old and retired or passed away. Each surviving iron lung user became increasingly dependent on a shrinking pool of custom fabricated parts and a handful of dedicated helpers who kept their machine running through sheer ingenuity. To depend, for your every breath, on a device the world had stopped building, to know that a single unfixable failure could end you, is a quiet, constant weight, almost impossible to fully imagine. So what ended the age of the iron lung ward? Not a better machine, something far greater: prevention. In 1955, after years of intensive research and one of the largest medical field trials in history, A vaccine developed by Dr. Jonas Salk was announced to be safe and effective against polio. The news was met with something close to national jubilation. Church bells rang. People wept in the streets. A disease that had terrified parents for generations, that had filled wards with paralyzed and suffocating children every summer, could now be prevented. A later oral vaccine developed by Dr. Albert Sabin made mass vaccination even easier. The effect was staggering and swift. As vaccination spread, polio cases plummeted. The summer terror receded. The great epidemic stopped, and the iron lung wards, those long rooms full of breathing machines, began, one by one, to empty. New cases of paralytic polio in vaccinated populations dwindled towards zero. The machines were retired, moved to storage, or scrapped. Within a couple of decades, in much of the world, the iron lung had gone from a life-saving necessity to a historical artifact. Polio has now been eliminated from the vast majority of the world, pushed to the very brink of complete global eradication by ongoing vaccination efforts, one of the greatest public health achievements in human history. Most doctors practicing today have never seen a case of paralytic polio. Most people alive today have never seen an iron lung outside of a museum or a photograph, and that is precisely why this story matters. The iron lung is a monument to a world we have almost forgotten, a world where a healthy child could be sealed into a metal tube to breathe, and where some never came out. It stands at the intersection of horror and hope, horrifying in what the disease did, and in the claustrophobic confinement its solution required, but ultimately a testament to the fact that we defeated the thing that filled those wards. We did not just build better machines to breathe for the paralyzed, we stopped the paralysis from happening at all. The last few iron lungs, and the last few people who lived in them, are a living bridge to that vanished era. A reminder, breathing quietly in steel, of both the cruelty of nature and the ingenuity and compassion of the medicine that answered it. When the last of them falls silent, it will mark the true end of one of the most haunting chapters in the history of the hospital. We are extraordinarily fortunate to live on the other side of it. If haunting medical history like this stays with you the way it stays with us, please take a moment to subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. We investigate the real, documented history of medicine, its horrors, its machines, its epidemics, and the hard-won victories that ended them. Your subscription is what keeps this channel going. This has been a real, documented historical account. Every detail is sourced from confirmed medical and historical records. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. For a generation of children, breathing meant lying sealed inside a machine, and the sound that filled those wards, hiss and sigh, was the sound of medicine keeping them alive, one borrowed breath at a time.